that would be impossible. Let's get to the real glasses. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Canios, for 42 years as a lightning rod for literature in Sag Harbor and across the region. Not that literature wasn't here, but the work of Canio for many years from the day he opened this place, after getting stuck out here with a hurricane, to the day that you guys took it over, and right up to the present. Canio's has been a remarkable force as a Long Islander. We returned to Long Island in 1988, 8 years after the place was open. And knowing Canio from Harborfields, who was teaching Italian and Spanish, I came out here. And of course, there's a Friday night thing, a Saturday night thing. It was one of the only locations on Long Island where poetry was happening to any significant extent for many years. There was a Long Island Poetry Collective in Huntington. Stony Brook did a little bit. Hofstra did a little bit. But this was it. This was it. And it was Canio's remarkable charm and ability to bring people together that brought the luminaries that were out here, you know, in Sag Harbor and in the Hamptons to this location, and the regional poets onto the same field. And it was something I learned way back then from Canio about, you know, crossing threads to see what emerges from it. I've carried with me my whole life as an organizer of poetry, so kudos to this outfit. I have just a few words to say, and then I'm going to read about 12 minutes worth of Lawrence Ferlinghetti poems. But you know, as a bipolar, as a polarity of these two Italian-American communities in New York City, Little Italy and Bleecker Street, on the one hand, and North Beach, you know, the relationship between Bohemian American culture and these Italian neighborhoods is something really important. And I'd love to hear from Fred about that someday. And at the same time, the fact that many of the Bohemians, going all the way back to George Sterling, who was from Sag Harbor, and went out and became part of the Bohemian Club. He co-founded the Bohemian Club with Jack London and some others. It goes back that far, and it continued right through the 50s, a couple of generations of it. So that Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Jack Hirschman and Harold Norse and Neely Tchaikovsky, for that matter, and Diane DePrima, for that matter, all of them New York people who went across to San Francisco, and there was this thing going on. So many of the poems that you read by many of these people have a sort of nostalgia for their childhood experiences in the New York area, growing up where they grew up, Coney Island of the Mind. You know, Penny Candy Store Beyond the Hill was where I first fell in love with unreality. You know, a person in San Francisco couldn't write that. A person from New York City, even though he spent some of his time, Lawrence Ferlinghetti spent some of his time in Bronxville in a mansion, the Sarah Lawrence family's mansion. He also spent time in very rough neighborhoods and orphanages and boarding houses, so he knew this area. The fact that when we put together this collection, which Marianne mentioned before, New York City from the Inside, we were able to get work from Diane DePrima and Lawrence Ferlinghetti and Jack Hirschman for a nostalgia for their childhood experiences. That informs both the San Francisco Renaissance and reinforms what we do here in New York. So I can tell you about going to Big Sur and visiting that cabin. It belonged to Larry Mendez Monsanto Ferlinghetti. Jack Kerouac had his nervous breakdown in, but I'd rather just read to you a couple of poems from the early days, because we have some people, especially the one that Fred read, a fabulous poem, and some other people who are going to read some of the more recent poems. It has some very quick ones, and they represent the Bob prosody and the deconstructionist Dada experience that he was trying to, and the idea of absurdity constantly risking absurdity and death. You know, the acrobat climbs on a high wire to his own making. And these are things that Ferlinghetti was seeking out at that time. As was Gregory Corso and some others. So that surrealist pop and excitement, and then also the comic energy. The absurdist comic energy is something that carries through. Plus also a tenderness and a kind of nostalgia. See, it was like this when we stepped into this place. A couple of papish cats was doing the Aztec two-step. So I says, "Dad, let's cut." But then this dame comes up behind me, sees, and says, "You and me could really exist." "Wow," I says. Only the next day, she has bad teeth and really hates poetry. I put out the word on Facebook to people, give me a request for what to read. And so Joe Allegretti from New Jersey, a poet in New Jersey, who walked across the George Washington Bridge to attend events in New York City, asked me to read this one. "For all I know, maybe she was happier than anyone. That lone crone in the shawl, on the orange crate train, with the little tame bird in her handkerchief, crooning to it all the time, mia moscata, mia moscata." And none of the Sunday excursionists with their bottles and their baskets paying any attention. And the coach creaking on through cornfields so slowly that butterflies flew in and out. Here's that Bob Crosby. And this is definitely a San Francisco poem. The dog. The dog trots freely in the street and sees reality. And the things he sees are bigger than himself, and the things he sees are his reality. Drunks in doorways, moons on trees. The dog trots freely through the street, and the things he sees are smaller than himself. Fish on newsprint, ants in holes, chickens in Chinatown windows, their heads a block away. The dog trots freely in the street, and the things he smells something like himself. The dog trots freely in the street, past puddles and babies, past cats and cigars, pool rooms, policemen. He doesn't hate cops. He merely has no use for them. And past the dead cows hung up whole in front of the San Francisco meat market. He would rather eat a tender cow than a tough policeman, though either might do. And he goes past the Romeo Ravioli factory, and past Coit's Tower, and past Congressman Doyle. He's afraid of Coit's Tower, but he's not afraid of Congressman Doyle. Although what he hears is very discouraging, very depressing, very absurd to a sad young dog like himself, to a serious dog like himself. But he has his own free world to live in, his own fleas to eat. He will not be muzzled. Congressman Doyle is just another fire hydrant to him. The dog trots freely in the street and has his own dog's life to live and to think about and to reflect upon. Touching, tasting, testing everything, investigating everything without benefit of perjury. A real realist with a real tale to tell and a real tale to tell it with. A real live barking democratic dog engaged in real free enterprise with something to say about ontology. Something to say about reality and how to see it and how to hear it with his head cocked sideways at street corners as if he is just about to have his picture taken for Victor Records. Listening for his master's voice and looking like a live question mark into the great gramophone of puzzling existence with its wondrous hollow horn, which always seems just about to spout forth some "The world is a beautiful place to be born into," if you don't mind happiness not always being so very much fun. If you don't mind a touch of hell now and then, just when everything's fine, because even in heaven, they don't sing all the time. The world is a very beautiful place to be born into. If you don't mind much, a few dead minds in the highest places, or a bomb or two now and then in your upturned faces, or a bomb or two. right? And your upturned faces or such other improprieties as your name brand society is prey to, with its men of distinction, with its men of extinction, and its priests and other patrolmen, and its various segregations and congressional investigations and other constipations. That only fool flesh is heir to. Yes, the world is the best place of all for a lot of things. Such things as making the fun scene, making the love scene, making the sad scene, singing low songs of having inspirations and walking around and looking at everything and smelling flowers and goosing statues and even thinking and kissing people and making and wearing pants and waving hats and dancing and going swimming in rivers on picnics in the middle of the summer, just generally living it up. Yes, but then right in the middle of it comes the smiling mortician. This is a reminiscence poem. I don't know if this actually happened to him. I remember Canio gripping this. Canio is such a powerful force. He was like, his hands were like that. I was always surprised by that. He had that little bit of nervousness because I thought he was a god. He was a god.
He was.
He is a god.
He is a god.
Fortune has its cookies to give out, which is a good thing. Since it has been a long time since that summer in Brooklyn, when they closed off the street one hot day, and the firemen turned on their hoses, and all the kids ran out into it, in the middle of the street, and there were maybe a couple dozen of us out there with the water squirting up to the sky and all over us. There was maybe only 6 of us, kids all together, running around in their bare feet and birthday suits, and I remember Molly, but then the firemen stopped squirting their hoses and all of a sudden and went back into the firehouse and started playing Pinochle again, just as if nothing had ever happened. Well, I remember Molly looked at me and ran in because I guess we were the only ones there.
Mm-hmm.
And this one I just have to read because I was very influenced by Ferlinghetti, although I didn't want to admit it for many years. He had so much in his work, so much literary theory, European literary theory, at the time modernism, modernism kicked down and that stuff. So I thought, this is just like, Bohemian stuff, it's beatnik stuff, but he's so well educated. Did went to Sorbonne. He translated Jacques Prévert. He translated André Brozhnev. This guy knew where he was coming from. So I was taking oral interpretation of modern poetry from W.D. Snodgrass at Syracuse in 1970. This must be a gut class, real easy, Snodgrass just liked to hit on the women and drink. So it's supposed to be really easy. But it was challenging because he was an excellent reader. The penny candy store beyond the L is where I first fell in love with unreality. Jelly beans glowed in the semi-gloom of that September afternoon. A cat upon the counter moved among licorice sticks and Tootsie Rolls and Oh Boy gum. Outside, the leaves were falling as they died. A wind had blown away the sun. A girl ran in. Her hair was rainy. Her breasts were breathless in the little room. Outside, the leaves were falling. And they cried, too soon. Too soon. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, thank you for doing this.